love what I do, and I'm very grateful that I've made it. I don't know how many people really get to live to see their dreams come true, but...
For decades, Dolly Parton smiled through the pain. She was the glittering country icon who never spoke ill of anyone, especially not the man who made her a star. But behind every rhinestone was a wound, and behind every hit song, a power struggle. Porter Wagoner was once her champion, her partner, her greatest creative foil, and ultimately, her fiercest adversary. Now, at 79, Dolly Parton is finally telling the truth. Why did she stay silent for so long? And what really happened behind the curtain of the Porter Wagoner show? Dolly Rebecca Parton was born in 1946, the fourth of 12 children, into the hills of Sevier County, Tennessee. Her family was poor in every sense but spirit. They lived in a one-room cabin with no electricity, no running water, and barely enough food. But the air was thick with hymns, harmonies, and stories. The mountains didn't just raise Dolly, they shaped her voice, a blend of Southern grit, Pentecostal soul, and Appalachian poetry. From the age of 5, Dolly sang in church. By 10, she was performing on local radio. By 13, she recorded her first single. By 18, she was in Nashville, armed with a guitar, 100 songs, and a dream too big for the Grand Ole Opry. But the music industry was a closed system, especially for women. It was run by men, sold by men, and dictated by men who decided when and if a woman could be more than just a pretty harmony. Dolly needed a platform, and in 1967 she found it, or rather, it found her. His name was Porter Wagoner. Already a staple on television with The Porter Wagoner Show, he was known for his rhinestone suits, southern drawl, and slick pompadour. He was a star, and he was looking for a girl singer to replace Norma Jean, who had abruptly left the show. When Dolly auditioned, something changed. She wasn't just good, she was undeniable. Porter hired her almost immediately. But this wasn't just a gig. It was a power arrangement, one that would define the next 7 years of Dolly Parton's life. From the outside, it was a dream pairing. Porter and Dolly became a national sensation. Their duets climbed the charts. The TV ratings soared. They were America's sweethearts, the backwoods Barbie and the country king. But behind the camera, a storm was brewing. The chemistry between Dolly Parton and Porter Wagoner was instant and combustible. On screen, they looked like perfect opposites. Porter, the established patriarch of country music. Dolly, the young ingenue with a voice too big for her frame. Together, they were lightning in a bottle. But while America fell in love with the image, the truth behind the curtain was far more complicated. Porter didn't just hire Dolly, he controlled her. He picked the songs, set the schedule, negotiated the contracts. He promised her fame, and he delivered. But the cost was steep. Dolly was grateful, but not blind. From the beginning, she chafed at the limits of their arrangement. She was a songwriter, not just a voice. She had ideas, ambition, and a vision for her own career. But Porter didn't want a partner. He wanted a protege, a subordinate. And when Dolly started to outshine him, the power dynamic cracked. According to people close to the show, Porter grew possessive, jealous. He'd snap at Dolly off camera, criticize her wardrobe, veto her song choices. He was known to throw tantrums in the studio, particularly when producers praised her work over his. He knew she was destined for more, one former bandmate later said, and he hated that he couldn't stop it. Still, Dolly stayed for 7 long years. Why? Because she was playing the long game. She understood the platform Porter gave her. Under his spotlight, she released hit after hit. Just Because I'm a Woman. Daddy was an old-time preacher man, and countless duets with Wagoner himself. The exposure was invaluable. But Dolly was biding her time. Every song she wrote was a step toward independence. Every television appearance, a rehearsal for her solo future. And then, in 1973, she wrote the song, "I Will Always Love You." On the surface, it was a love ballad. But it wasn't about a lover. It was about Porter. The lyrics were clear. She was leaving, with gratitude, but finality. "If I should stay, I would only be in your way." She sang it for him privately in his office. According to Dolly, he wept. And then he got angry. Dolly Parton's departure from the Porter Wagoner show was not graceful. It was volcanic. By 1974, she had officially left the show. Porter was livid. To him, it wasn't just betrayal. It was humiliation. He had built her career, he believed, made her famous, and now she was walking away, while his own star began to dim. Behind the scenes, things turned ugly fast. Though she had left the show, Dolly was still under contract with Porter's publishing company. He had a stake in her music, her royalties, and her brand. She tried to negotiate her freedom, offering him a settlement, a percentage, even creative control over some recordings. But he wanted more. In 1979, Porter Wagoner sued Dolly Parton for $3 million, alleging breach of contract. He claimed she owed him for years of unpaid royalties, for business deals she had made independently, and for violating the terms of their agreement. The lawsuit stunned the industry. Up to that point, Dolly had been the perfect Southern belle, charming, gracious, scandal-free. Now she was in court, fighting the man who discovered her. And she didn't fight dirty. She fought smart. Dolly countersued, but eventually settled the case privately. Years later, she revealed in interviews that she paid Porter the full amount he asked for. Not because she believed he was right, but because she wanted peace. "I just handed it over," she said. "I thought, you need it more than I do." Still, the damage was done. Their relationship remained strained for decades. They stopped speaking. Porter made disparaging remarks in interviews. Dolly stayed mostly silent. She focused on her solo career, which exploded after their split. Jolene, 9 to 5. Here You Come Again. The hits came fast. The image transformed. She was no longer someone's sidekick. She was Dolly Parton, a global icon. And yet, for all the fame and fortune, the scar Porter left behind never quite healed. She wrote about it in songs, hinted at it in interviews, but never told the full story. Not until recently. By the time the 1980s dawned, Dolly Parton was more than just a country singer. She was a crossover star, a Hollywood actress, a pop chart presence, and an American icon in her own right. But for every red carpet she walked, there was a man sitting in the shadows of Music Row, stewing in bitterness and disbelief. Porter Wagoner had not expected to be left behind. In his mind, he had created Dolly, molded her, shaped her, delivered her to the world. He couldn't accept that the woman he had introduced on national television was now headlining sold-out arenas and starring in films with Jane Fonda and Lily Tomlin. Worse yet, she was doing it all without him. Their falling out had split the country music community. Older traditionalists sided with Porter, the faithful host who had given Dolly her start. To them, she was ungrateful, opportunistic. Younger artists, meanwhile, admired Dolly's bravery. She had done what few women in Nashville had ever dared: break free from male control and survive. Behind the public tension was a quiet war over reputation. Porter, still a powerful figure in Nashville, used his influence to paint Dolly as a backstabber. He told reporters she had used him. He claimed she owed him everything. In interviews during the early 80s, he said things like, I made her a star, and she turned her back on me. He never missed an opportunity to remind the world that Dolly had once been his girl singer. Dolly, for her part, kept her responses gentle, but guarded. She never outright attacked Porter. She didn't have to. Her success was her rebuttal. Still, the emotional toll was immense. In private, Dolly grieved the relationship. She had loved Porter, not romantically, but profoundly. He had been a mentor, a partner, a complex father figure, and now he was her most vocal critic. In multiple interviews over the years, she hinted at the betrayal she felt. "It broke my heart," she once said, "but I had to leave, or I'd never grow." Through the decades, Dolly tried to extend olive branches. She spoke kindly of their musical legacy. She continued to perform their duets during concerts. She even pushed for him to be inducted into the Country Music Hall of Fame, which finally happened in 2002. But Porter's bitterness ran deep. Even as his health began to decline in the early 2000s, he rarely softened. Friends noted that he still bristled at Dolly's name, especially when the media lauded her as a self-made legend. "She's rewriting history," he once said. But time and mortality have a way of reframing everything. The great divide between him and Dolly no longer seemed insurmountable. She visited him in the hospital. They spoke, not for the cameras, but for themselves. No lawyers, no managers, just two people, now in the twilight of their lives, reckoning with a past they could never quite outrun. Porter died later that year, and Dolly, for the first time in decades, wept for him publicly. The lawsuit between Porter Wagoner and Dolly Parton in 1979 wasn't just a personal rupture. It was a symbolic moment in country music history. Never before had such a public battle emerged between a male country legend and his female protege, especially one that exposed the raw mechanics of power, money, and creative control behind the curtain of Nashville's glittering stage. When Porter sued Dolly for $3 million, it sent shockwaves through the industry. The lawsuit alleged breach of contract, citing unpaid royalties, management violations, and lost profits tied to Dolly's solo ventures. He claimed he had made her a household name and deserved a financial stake in everything she achieved thereafter. The details were complicated. Dolly had signed multiple overlapping agreements with Porter, some formal, some verbal, that bound her to his publishing company and management structures. At the time of her departure, she was still tied to those contracts. But Dolly wasn't about to let her independence be dismantled in court. She responded with dignity and strategic brilliance. Rather than wage a media war, she took the high road publicly while assembling a legal team privately. Behind closed doors, however, she was furious. Furious that the man she had once called a partner now sought to reduce her to a line item. Furious that a system built by men believed she owed them for every step forward. She could have fought him tooth and nail, could have countersued, dragged his name through the mud, and exposed his behind-the-scenes behavior. But she didn't. Instead, Dolly settled. Quietly. She paid him what he asked. All of it. And then she moved on. That decision baffled many at the time. Why surrender so easily, especially when her star was rising and his was fading? But Dolly wasn't thinking short-term. She knew that reputation, grace, and legacy would matter more than a courtroom win. She wanted her story to be about rising above the fight, not being consumed by it. That same year, she released Great Balls of Fire and began her Hollywood ascent with 9 to 5. While Porter languished in nostalgia, Dolly was reinventing herself, not as a country queen, but as a global force. Yet the legal scars lingered. She became more cautious. Every contract, every deal, every project was scrutinized. She built her own companies, including her own publishing house, ensuring no man would ever own her art again. She took control of her image, her brand, and her voice with a calculated fury that shaped the rest of her career. Somewhere in that fire, Dolly evolved. She was no longer the young girl smiling beside Porter on television. She was a mogul, a machine, a woman who had survived the system and turned it inside out. And Porter? He faded from headlines, released a few albums, toured small venues, but the world had moved on to a new kind of star, one he couldn't touch anymore. After her break from Porter Wagoner, Dolly Parton began crafting songs that didn't just tell stories, they declared war. Not with anger, but with elegance. Her freedom wasn't just legal, it was lyrical. In 1974, the same year she left the Porter Wagoner show, Dolly released I Will Always Love You, a song so layered in emotion that even Porter couldn't deny its power. Elvis Presley wanted to record it, but his manager demanded publishing rights. Dolly, now fiercely protective of her work, said no. It was a bold move, one that left millions on the table. But decades later, it paid off. Whitney Houston's 1992 version of the song, featured in The Bodyguard, became a global phenomenon. It won multiple awards, topped charts worldwide, and solidified Dolly's status not just as a singer, but as one of the greatest songwriters of all time. And she owned it, every word, every note. That was her revenge. In the years that followed, Dolly's songwriting flourished. No longer confined to duets or Porter-approved ballads, she wrote about everything: heartbreak, ambition, injustice, hope. Songs like Light of a Clear Blue Morning and Eagle When She Flies spoke of resilience, not just personal, but political. These were freedom songs, not loud, not angry, but unmistakably defiant. Behind every shimmering stage costume was a woman who had clawed her way to autonomy. And her music reflected that. Fans sensed the depth, the bruises beneath the beauty. They heard the cost of independence in every lyric. But Dolly never turned her songs into attacks. Even when speaking about Porter, she refused bitterness. "He gave me my start," she often said, "and I'll always be grateful." Still, she never forgot the pain. That duality, love and hurt, gratitude and betrayal, became a hallmark of her songwriting. Few artists have captured such complexity with such grace. Fewer still have done so while building an empire. By the time she reached her 70s, Dolly had written over 3,000 songs, sold over 100 million records, and influenced generations of artists. But to understand her music, really understand it, one has to go back to Porter. Because in breaking from him, she found herself. At 79 years old, Dolly Parton did something she had never done before. She spoke, truly, deeply, and without her signature deflection, about Porter Wagoner. Not in a passing anecdote, not in a tidy PR soundbite, but with a clarity that only time, pain, and grace can provide. It came during a 2023 radio interview promoting her Rockstar album, an ambitious crossover project that defied expectations. The host asked gently about her early mentors, and the tone shifted. Dolly paused, her voice lowered, and then she said it. "I loved Porter Wagoner, but he broke my heart. Not in the romantic way, but in the way a person breaks your spirit when they try to own you." The room fell silent. It wasn't the first time she'd spoken about Porter, but it was the first time she peeled back the mask. She spoke of his brilliance, his ear for harmony, and his role in her career. But then she spoke of the darker truths, his jealousy, his emotional manipulation, and the power struggle that nearly swallowed her. "I was young, and I was scared, but I was also determined. I knew I had more to give, more than what he wanted from me." Listeners were stunned. For decades, Dolly had carried the narrative of gratitude, of forgiveness. But here, with her legacy secure and nothing left to prove, she allowed herself vulnerability. She revealed that she had written journals during her years with Porter, pages filled with frustration, rage, and hope. She admitted that leaving the show was the hardest decision of her life, that she cried for days, that she questioned whether she had the strength to go it alone. And then she shared something unexpected. She had recently found an old cassette tape, a rehearsal recording from the early 70s. It was her and Porter working on a song, his voice sharp, hers trembling. At one point, he snapped at her for changing a lyric. She fell silent. "Listening to it now," she said, "broke my heart all over again." The public was captivated, not just because of what Dolly said, but because she finally let herself say it. In the months that followed, fans and critics re-examined her early work. The Porter years were no longer just a nostalgic era of sparkly suits and cheerful duets. They were a battleground, a blueprint for what so many women endure. Mentorship laced with control, opportunity shadowed by debt. And Dolly? She didn't shy away from the complexity. She didn't cancel Porter. She didn't destroy him. She humanized him. "He was a great man," she said, "and a flawed one, just like the rest of us." It was the kind of truth only a woman of nearly 8 decades could offer. Hard-earned, unpolished, and real. Porter Wagoner died in 2007, but for Dolly, his presence never left. In interviews, she often described him as a ghost in my life. Not in the supernatural sense, but in the way old pain lingers. She'd see his face in dreams, hear his voice in old recordings, think of him in quiet moments between shows. Theirs was a relationship unresolved. After his death, Dolly publicly mourned him. She performed at his funeral, choking back tears as she sang, "I Will Always Love You," the song that marked both her goodbye and his deepest wound. Many in attendance said it was the most raw they'd ever seen her. But privately, she began a different kind of mourning. She visited his grave on anniversaries, left notes, sometimes flowers. Once, she left a vinyl copy of the first album they recorded together, wrapped in a ribbon. "I wanted him to know I still carry him," she later confessed. For years, Dolly had resisted writing a memoir. She said she wasn't ready, that some stories needed time. But insiders close to her suggested that it was Porter's memory that she wasn't ready to confront. Not until she'd forgiven him. Not until she'd forgiven herself. Because for all her success, there was a part of Dolly that questioned, could she have handled it differently? Could she have stayed longer, left sooner, fought harder? She never answered those questions publicly. But in 2023, as part of a reflective podcast series, she dedicated an entire episode to Porter. It wasn't a puff piece, it was a reckoning. She played clips of their duets, but also of their arguments. She read passages from old journal entries. She cried. "He was the mountain I had to climb," she said, "and the shadow I had to leave behind." Listeners were floored. Even those who had known about the lawsuit, the tension, the trauma, had never heard her speak this way. It was, in many ways, a final conversation with the man who had both lifted and limited her. And as the episode ended, she played an unreleased track, just her on guitar, singing a song written for Porter, never recorded professionally. The lyrics? Simple, brutal, beautiful. "You held the door, but I walked through, and I still see the sky you never knew." Dolly Parton has always been in control of her image. The wigs, the laughter, the aw-shucks charm, all part of a carefully constructed armor. But what's remarkable is how, in her later years, she's chosen to dismantle it piece by piece. She no longer needs to be everyone's sweetheart. She's not just the queen of country. She's a cultural force, a philanthropist, a literary icon, and a savvy businesswoman. And yet, with all her accolades, she's begun to reclaim something even more valuable: the truth of her story. For decades, Porter Wagoner loomed large in Dolly's narrative. He was the man who discovered her, the gatekeeper, the first chapter. But now, with age and distance, Dolly has shifted the lens. She was never just Porter's girl. She was never merely the sidekick. She was always the force behind the smile, writing the songs, shaping the duets, planning her exit years in advance. And that reclaiming isn't just symbolic. In 2022, a documentary team approached Dolly about producing a biopic. She had refused in the past. This time, she said yes, with one condition: she would have final creative control. She wanted the Porter years portrayed accurately, but without vilification. She wanted the truth. She was adamant, said the director. She didn't want revenge. She wanted reckoning. The film, still in development, promises to explore Dolly's rise not as an accident of Porter's generosity, but as a triumph of her own will. She's also begun archiving old footage from the Porter Wagoner show, correcting credits, reclaiming rights, and providing commentary. For the first time, she's contextualizing that era not as a golden age, but as a crucible. She's re-releasing remastered versions of their duets, paired with new liner notes written by Dolly herself. In them, she reflects on each song, often with brutal honesty. This one was recorded after a fight, she writes about a 1972 single. I was smiling on camera, but my hands were shaking. Fans are seeing her differently now, not just as a symbol, but as a survivor. She didn't just sing her way out of Porter Wagoner's shadow. She wrote her way out. And now, she's telling the story on her terms. Finally, Dolly Parton didn't just walk away from the Porter Wagoner show, she walked into history. It's easy now to see her as inevitable. The wigs, the theme park, the endless hits. But in 1974, when she left Porter, nothing was guaranteed. She risked everything: alienation from the industry, legal ruin, personal heartbreak. But she trusted herself, her voice, her pen, and that decision, that walk into uncertainty, is what made her. She wrote "I Will Always Love You" as a farewell. But it became an anthem, not just of love, but of liberation. And that's what Dolly's entire career has been about: carving freedom from systems designed to control. Now, at 79, she is more than famous. She's foundational, a name that transcends genre, generation, and geography. But what she never says, and perhaps never needs to, is that Porter Wagoner, for all his talent and torment, could never have contained her. She loved him. She learned from him. And then she left him. Not out of malice, but out of necessity. And in doing so, she created a model for women everywhere: gratitude without submission, grace without silence, love without obedience. That's what she won by walking away. Dolly Parton's story with Porter Wagoner is no longer just a tale of mentorship and music. It's a story of power, pain, and the price of freedom. At 79, she's finally telling the truth. And in doing so, she reminds us that sometimes the hardest song to sing is the one that sets you free. Subscribe for more untold stories of the legends who shaped culture and the truths they tried to bury. WC 4108